forest was silent in the way. Only deep wilderness can be. No wind, no birds, just the low crunch of boots against dry pine needles. The hikers almost missed it at first. What caught their attention wasn't a body or clothing or even bone. It was something far more ordinary and far more disturbing. A piece of fabric, sun-bleached and torn, snagged on a fallen branch just off a barely visible trail. At first glance, it looked like trash, but as one of them stepped closer, pushing aside brush that hadn't been disturbed in years, the ground seemed to open up its secret all at once. A shoe, then another, and then, partially buried beneath layers of decomposed leaves and soil, human remains. The realization hit slowly, then all at once. Someone had died here, and not recently. When park rangers arrived hours later, the scene only deepened the mystery. The location was strange, too far from established hiking routes, yet not deep enough into the backcountry to explain how no one had found it sooner. As forensic teams worked carefully through the undergrowth, they uncovered evidence that told a chilling story. This wasn't just one person. There were two, side by side. 13 years earlier, a newly married couple had driven into Yosemite National Park and vanished without a trace. No wreckage, no campsite, no goodbye note. For more than a decade, investigators believed the park had swallowed them whole. Now standing in the shadow of towering pines, the question was no longer where are they? It was what happened out here. And why did it take 13 years to find them? And perhaps most unsettling of all, if these remains had been here the entire time, how many people had walked past them without ever knowing? Before we go further, take a moment to think about this. Do you believe nature alone can explain every disappearance in places like Yosemite? Or are there some stories that suggest something darker? Let me know what you think as we go. The couple at the center of this mystery didn't look like people headed for tragedy. Friends described them as happy, grounded, and inseparable. They had met only a few years earlier through mutual friends, bonding over a shared love of travel and the outdoors. Their relationship moved quickly, but no one thought it was reckless. If anything, it seemed inevitable. They married in early 1986 in a small ceremony surrounded by family. There were photographs from that day. Soft smiles, arms wrapped tightly around each other, the kind of expressions that suggest a belief that life is finally falling into place. They talked openly about the future, buying a home, starting a family, and seeing as much of the country as they could while they were still young. Yosemite was meant to be part of that dream. They had talked about the trip for weeks. It wasn't a honeymoon, they couldn't afford something extravagant, but it was symbolic. A quiet getaway to celebrate the beginning of their life together. They planned to camp, hike, and take photographs. Nothing extreme, nothing dangerous. Just a few days surrounded by nature. On the morning they left, everything appeared normal. They packed their car carefully: tent, sleeping bags, food, a cooler, hiking boots, and a camera they rarely went anywhere without. According to family members, they were in good spirits, joking about who would get lost first and who would forget to pack something important. They told relatives exactly where they were going and when they expected to be back. That would become painfully important later. Their drive took them through small California towns toward the Sierra Nevada foothills. Sometime late that morning, they stopped at a roadside diner not far from the park. A waitress would later recall them vividly, not because anything was wrong, but because they stood out as unusually happy. The couple shared a meal, talked excitedly about the park, and asked casual questions about road conditions and weather. They paid their bill, walked out together, and climbed back into their car. That is the last confirmed sighting of them alive. Later that afternoon, one phone call came through to family. It was brief. They said they had entered Yosemite and were amazed by how beautiful it was. They mentioned the crowds, the size of the cliffs, the excitement of finally being there. There was no sign of fear, no concern, no hint that anything was about to go wrong. After that call, there was nothing. When they didn't return home on the agreed date, concern grew quickly. At first, family members assumed poor cell service or a delayed return. Yosemite was remote, after all, but by the next day, worry turned into panic. Phone calls were made, park rangers were notified. Their names were run through campground registries. There was no record of them checking in anywhere. No campsite reserved, no vehicle reported abandoned, no citations, accidents, or ranger interactions logged under their names. By the third day, search efforts began in earnest. Rangers and volunteers fanned out across popular trails and overlooks. Helicopters scanned riverbanks and ravines. Search dogs were brought in to follow any possible scent from trailheads and parking areas. Nothing. Days passed with no progress. Search teams expanded into more difficult terrain, lowering themselves down steep slopes and combing through dense forest where visibility dropped to just a few feet. Yosemite is vast, nearly 1,200 square miles of wilderness, and much of it is unforgiving. Cliffs drop hundreds of feet without warning. Rivers run cold and fast, even in summer. The leading theory early on was simple and tragic. An accident. Perhaps they wandered off a trail. Perhaps one slipped and the other tried to help. Perhaps they fell somewhere that concealed their bodies completely. But that theory raised questions investigators couldn't ignore. Where was the car? If they had driven into the park, it should have been somewhere, parked at a trailhead, pulled off the road, or wrecked along a steep descent. Search teams drove every accessible roadway, peered into ravines, and checked pullouts. There was no sign of it. Weeks turned into months. Media coverage faded. Leads dried up. Eventually, the case went cold. For the families, time became its own kind of punishment. Every year that passed without answers felt heavier than the last. Holidays came and went. Birthdays passed in silence. The newlyweds who had once filled photo albums with promise became faces on missing person flyers. Investigators revisited the case periodically, but without new evidence, there was little they could do. Yosemite had claimed another mystery, one that joined a growing list of disappearances in national parks that defied easy explanation. And then, 13 years later, in a place not far from where thousands of hikers passed each season, the forest finally gave up what it had been hiding. 2 people, 2 lives, left behind the trees. It wasn't at the bottom of a ravine, it wasn't near a riverbank known for dangerous currents, and it wasn't deep in the remote backcountry, where only seasoned hikers dare to go. Instead, the remains were found in an area that existed in a strange in-between space, close enough to civilization that people should have passed nearby, yet concealed just enough to remain invisible for years. The trail itself was barely recognizable anymore. What had once been a lightly used maintenance path had slowly been reclaimed by nature. Fallen branches crisscrossed the ground. Thick underbrush pressed inward from both sides. Pine needles layered the forest floor so densely that anything beneath them disappeared almost instantly. This was the kind of place someone would only stumble upon by accident. When forensic teams began their work, it became clear just how long the remains had been there. Bones were scattered, but not widely dispersed, suggesting the bodies had decomposed largely where they fell. Clothing fragments were fragile, nearly fused with soil and plant matter. Metal items, belt buckles, buttons, small personal objects were oxidized and dulled by time. Among the items recovered was a wedding ring. That detail hit investigators hard. The positioning of the remains suggested the couple had been together when they died. They were not separated by distance. There was no indication of a struggle between them. Whatever happened, they experienced it side by side. But the scene raised immediate questions. Why were they here? This location was not on their planned route. It was not advertised in guidebooks. It was not a scenic overlook or a popular shortcut. To reach it, someone would have had to leave the main trail intentionally or be led there. Investigators mapped the area carefully, reconstructing possible paths the couple could have taken from known trailheads. None of them offered a simple explanation. Every route required deviation. Every theory introduced another unanswered question. One of the most unsettling realizations came when rangers reviewed historical search maps from 1986. Search teams had come dangerously close. In at least 2 documented passes, volunteers had searched within a few hundred yards of where the remains would eventually be found. Dense foliage, uneven terrain, and the limitations of ground searches meant they never saw what lay just beyond their line of sight. It wasn't that the couple had vanished into some unreachable abyss. They had been there all along. As forensic analysis continued, investigators worked to determine how they died. After 13 years, answers were limited. Soft tissue was long gone. Bones showed no clear signs of sharp force trauma. There were no bullets recovered, no obvious fractures that definitively indicated a fatal fall. The official conclusion leaned toward exposure, hypothermia, dehydration, or a combination of environmental factors. Yosemite weather can change quickly. A warm afternoon can turn into a freezing night without warning. Even experienced hikers have underestimated the park and paid with their lives. But for many involved in the case, that explanation felt incomplete. Exposure doesn't explain why they were off trail. It doesn't explain why they left no obvious campsite behind. It doesn't explain why their vehicle was never found. And it certainly doesn't explain why they would have willingly walked into an area with no clear destination. Some investigators quietly explored another possibility. What if they weren't lost? What if they were following someone? In the mid-1980s, Yosemite was not immune to crime. While violent incidents were rare, there were documented cases of assaults, thefts, and transient populations moving through the park. Hitchhiking was still common. Trusting strangers felt normal in a way it doesn't today. It was not unheard of for visitors to accept guidance from people who claimed to know the area. No suspects were ever publicly named. No evidence conclusively pointed to foul play. But the question lingered, especially among family members who knew the couple well. They were cautious. They planned their trips. They weren't reckless wanderers, so why did they end up somewhere that didn't make sense? Another disturbing detail emerged during the investigation. Despite extensive searches, the couple's car was never located. Not then. Not after the remains were found. Not years later. In cases involving accidents, vehicles often tell part of the story. A car at a trailhead, a wreck along a mountain road. Even an abandoned vehicle can point investigators in the right direction. Here, there was nothing. It was as if the car had simply vanished. Some speculated it may have been stolen. Others suggested it could have been pushed into a hidden ravine, still undiscovered. Yosemite's terrain hides secrets easily, and vehicles have been recovered decades later in places no one thought to search. Still, without physical evidence, every theory remained just that, a theory. For the families, the discovery brought both relief and renewed pain. After 13 years of uncertainty, they finally knew where their loved ones had ended up. There would be no miraculous return, no surprise phone call, no alternate ending. But closure did not come easily. They were left with questions that would never be fully answered. Did they suffer? Did they realize they were lost? Did they know help would never come? And perhaps the hardest question of all, could they have been saved? Today, hikers pass through Yosemite unaware of how many stories like this are buried beneath their feet. Trails shift, forests grow back, evidence fades, but the land remembers. Somewhere near that forgotten path, the ground still holds the imprint of where two people once sat, once stood, once believed they were on the right road. Their story is not just about disappearance. It's about how easily certainty can vanish in the wilderness, and how even the most beautiful places can keep the darkest secrets for the longest time. In the months following the discovery, investigators quietly reopened old files, hoping that modern eyes might notice something that had been overlooked in 1986. Reports were reread. Witness statements were re-examined. Maps were spread across tables once again, their edges worn from years of being folded and unfolded. One detail began to stand out. In the early days of the disappearance, several park visitors had reported seeing a couple matching the Newlyweds' description, speaking with a man near a turnout along one of the park roads. At the time, the sighting hadn't seemed unusual. Yosemite was full of travelers, and people struck up conversations constantly. The description of the man was vague, middle-aged, average height, wearing outdoor clothing. Nothing about him set off alarms. But when investigators looked back, they realized something troubling. That sighting was never fully followed up. The couple had been asking questions, specifically about a shorter trail that led to a scenic area not listed on most maps. The man reportedly claimed to know a lesser-known path that locals used. He pointed in the direction of a maintenance road that branched away from the main route. At the time, rangers had no reason to doubt the interaction. The park was considered safe. Visitors trusted one another, and there was no evidence the man had done anything wrong. But now, 13 years later, the location where the remains were found wasn't far from where that interaction was believed to have taken place. The trail the couple may have followed wasn't designed for visitors. It wasn't marked clearly. In some places, it simply faded into the forest. If they had believed it would reconnect with a main path or lead to a scenic viewpoint, it could have seemed like a harmless detour. Once off the established trail system, navigation becomes exponentially harder. Familiar landmarks disappear, sounds are distorted by trees and terrain. Even experienced hikers can become disoriented within minutes. If night fell while they were still searching for the way back, panic could have set in quickly. Investigators also considered the psychological side of being lost together. Couples often make decisions differently than individuals. One partner may try to stay calm while the other pushes forward, convinced the right path is just ahead. Arguments can arise. Fatigue sets in. Small injuries become serious obstacles, and Yosemite does not forgive hesitation. Temperatures drop sharply after sunset. Dew settles heavily on the forest floor. Clothing dampens. Hypothermia can begin even in conditions that don't feel extreme. Once it starts, judgment becomes impaired, making rational decisions almost impossible. The couple may have believed help would come in the morning, but morning may never have arrived for them. Despite these theories, some investigators couldn't shake the feeling that something else was wrong. There were no clear signs the couple had tried to build a shelter, no obvious fire pit, no indication they had attempted to leave markers or signals. In many lost hiker cases, people instinctively try to make themselves visible. Here there was very little evidence of that. And then there was the question of the car. Years after the remains were found, a diver working with a volunteer recovery group explored several bodies of water near the park roads. Vehicles had been recovered from similar environments elsewhere, sometimes decades after going missing. But once again, nothing connected to the Newlyweds surfaced. No license plate, no twisted metal, no trace at all. As time went on, the case settled into an uneasy place between explanation and mystery. Officially, it remained classified as accidental death due to environmental exposure. Unofficially, it lingered in the minds of those who worked it as something that never fully made sense. Family members held on to their own interpretations. Some accepted the wilderness explanation, finding peace in the idea that the couple spent their final moments together. Others believed they had been misled, intentionally or not, down a path they never should have taken. They would never know for sure. Today, Yosemite continues to welcome millions of visitors each year. Trails are better marked. Technology has improved. GPS devices, emergency beacons, and cell phones provide a sense of security that didn't exist in 1986. But even now, people still go missing. And sometimes, years later, hikers still stumble upon things they weren't meant to find. The Newlyweds story lives on as a reminder that the wilderness does not operate on intention or fairness. It does not care how careful you are, how happy you feel, or how many plans you've made for the future. One wrong turn is all it takes. If you've made it this far, I want you to think about something. If you were standing at that turnout in 1986, and someone pointed you toward a path they claimed would save you time, would you have followed it? Because somewhere out there, just beyond the edge of a familiar trail, answers still wait in the quiet, hidden beneath leaves, shadows, and the passing of time. Years after the case was officially closed, the story refused to stay buried. Rangers who had worked Yosemite for decades would sometimes mention the Newlyweds in quiet conversations, usually late at night, after tourists had cleared out and the park returned to its natural stillness. To them, this wasn't just another missing person file. It was a reminder of how thin the line is between safety and catastrophe in places like this. One ranger, now retired, admitted that the discovery bothered him more than any other case he'd worked. Not because the couple had died, but because of where they were found. He remembered walking that same stretch of forest years earlier. He remembered thinking how deceptively calm it felt, how the trees stood evenly spaced, how the ground sloped gently instead of dropping away violently. It didn't look dangerous. It didn't look like the kind of place people vanished. And yet, two people had. The ranger recalled something else too, something that never made it into official reports. In the late 1980s, there had been sporadic complaints from visitors about a man who lingered near pullouts and trailheads. He was friendly, talkative, always willing to give advice. He claimed to know shortcuts, hidden viewpoints, and locals-only spots that didn't show up on park maps. At the time, nothing about that behavior seemed criminal, but looking back, the ranger wondered how many people had followed that advice and how many never made it back. There was no proof this man was connected to the Newlyweds. No name, no photograph, no confirmed identity. But the memory stuck with those who had been there long enough to remember the early days of the investigation. And memories have a way of resurfacing when answers are scarce. Family members, desperate for clarity, tried to piece together the couple's final hours on their own. They traced routes on maps. They revisited the park. They walked trails the couple might have taken, stopping at places that felt significant without knowing why. Some said they felt an overwhelming sense of unease near the area where the remains were found. Others said it felt peaceful. Both reactions made sense. The couple had loved nature. Being surrounded by it may have felt right to them, even in the end. But the isolation, the knowledge that help was nearby yet unreachable, cast a shadow that never fully lifted. As years passed, the case faded from public memory, but it never truly disappeared. It lived on in online forums and whispered campfire stories, and in the growing fascination with disappearances in national parks. People began asking bigger questions. Why do so many cases follow similar patterns? Why are bodies sometimes found in places that were already searched? Why do some victims seem to vanish without leaving a logical trail behind? The Newlyweds case became part of that larger conversation, not because it was the most violent or dramatic, but because it was so quiet. No screams, no witnesses, no definitive cause. Just two people who stepped into the wilderness and never stepped back out. And that quiet is what unsettles people the most. There is no villain you can point to with certainty. No moment you can isolate and say, this is when everything went wrong. Instead, there is a slow narrowing of possibilities until only unanswered questions remain. Some believe the truth is simple, that the couple made an innocent decision, trusted the wrong path, and paid the ultimate price. Others believe simplicity itself is the illusion, that the park hides things we still don't fully understand. What makes this case endure isn't just what happened, it's what could have happened. A wrong turn, a misplaced trust, a decision made in good faith that could never be undone. Next time you find yourself in a place like Yosemite, standing at the edge of a trail surrounded by beauty that feels eternal, remember this story. Remember that not every path leads back. And remember that sometimes the most dangerous moments are the ones that don't feel dangerous at all, because somewhere beneath the trees, the land still holds the echo of two voices that believed they were heading in the right direction until the forest decided otherwise.